Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Or as always, you can go to we have a Facebook page, we've got a YouTube, we have the Media Cyphers Kalamazoo podcast that you can find on most podcasting apps. Again, if you can't stay tuned for the entire radio program, there are many ways for you to listen to us. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. And especially with some of the stuff in the news, I really want to, make that point very clear and explicit, because a lot of the stories we're going to be talking about today are about the kind of cracking down on free speech and anti apartheid, anti-genocide speech on campuses in particular. We're going to be spending a lot of time on today's show talking about that, as well as doing some very important Earth Day coverage. Honestly, I feel like in kind of last year, our coverage of climate change is, I mean, we've covered it a lot, but not as heavily as we really should have been. So we're going to be talking about some national stories as well as winding things back to how climate change is going to impact us here in Kalamazoo, how it already is impacting us as well. We're also going to be joined by I'm going to be joined by a wider colleague in a minute here, and we're going to be doing a little bit of kind of capture some very important recent history about the station and how it navigated the COVID and post-COVID terrain. Um, Before all that, though, I think a good way to start, and I know we usually start with local stuff, but I think what I did want, I guess I'll start with this because it's not local and it is kind of a national story. But we're going to go to the movies real quick, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that movie that just came out, Civil War. Um, Now, this made a lot of money over the weekend. A lot of people went out to see it. Bogglingly, there's literally competing headlines about how liberals from blue states and men from red states were alternatively like propelling Civil War to the top of the box office. And my movie going experience does echo some of that, which I'll explain in a little bit. But I did want to talk about Civil War, and the thing is, typically when we do kind of a political analysis of movies here on the show, we do a little bit of a spoiler alert. It's hard for me to say that there's really any spoilers because basically what you see in the trailer is what you get in the film, for better or worse. And there's really not that much of a plot. Like the few things I could spoil are just like kind of the natural progression of the film. And so I kind of went into this knowing that this wasn't going to be like some explicitly, materialist screed about, how these events could actually transpire. And it certainly wasn't going to be about class warfare. And there was going to be a little bit of abstraction going on. So Civil War was directed by a European director. No offense, made some great movies, Ex Machina, Men, etc. But I definitely do think, given the subject matter, A24 may have wanted to bring in a director who's maybe grown up in the conditions that are potentially propelling the United States towards a civil war. So right off the bat, you have the idea that Texas and California are going to team up against the federal government, create the Western forces. Now, I do want to kind of step back and say, so there's different ways to review a movie. I could review this as a film critic. I did do a lot of playwriting and stuff like that back in the day, so I'm going to put a little bit of that in this, but it's going to be mostly like kind of a political critique. And something, oh, excuse me, sorry. So when I delve into it a little bit deeper later on, though, I want y'all to kind of know this is going to be more a political focus on the movie than talking about its artistic merits and demerits. But we're going to kind of put that on the shelf for right now. We're going to take a quick little break. When I come back, I'm going to be joined by one of my WIDR comrades to talk about, well, really just the last couple of years. And particularly, if you tuned in last week, you heard me talking about kind of the importance of this most recent generation of WIDRites who really not only kind of rescued the station from COVID purgatory, but really has made it thrive. So we're going to be having a discussion about that. Keep your dialogue. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Your only solution. No, your your only your source for political revolution. Oh yeah, see, I'm on the spot now because like I have a colleague and now I'm flubbing up. All right, okay, we'll get a quick little break. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, we are back. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR. So I'm joined now by Logan Lastname. Logan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's finals week.
I,
So
by the way, thank you so much for, I don't know how stressful your upcoming finals are, but it's like, I still have a sense memory of college, this back in
oh yeah.
back in the day. And okay, it's kind of riffing on, my, I'm the old, what's the polite term we use? Legacy DJ. But um, so I've been at the station for a while. They can't kick me out. And I started doing like this political talk show about 8 years ago. God. Um, but because of that, I've really seen the station, through its up and downs and transformations, and something that a lot of people, both who were been working at the station at the time, or volunteering at the station, plus people in the community know is, especially probably the biggest test for the station was about 4 years ago. COVID-19, we had to give it to the computer for the better part of 6 to 8 months. And then
Yeah.
once we finally started back in, we were doing kind of pre-recorded shows and all that. And you're part of the graduating class of 2024. And one, I kind of just wanted to record this for wider posterity and history. It's like how the station made it through those years, and also just getting your perspective as somebody who was a student in the middle of the crisis, how that went. So why don't we just start with kind of your early college years and how you got involved in the station and kind of your sense of where wider was at when you started working with us.
Yeah, so just a little backstory on my college experience. I grew up in Battle Creek, so not too far from here. And, I had all my college dreams picked out. I had a roommate. I was going to go to MSU, you know. But because of COVID, everything completely changed. And I spent my first year of college at KCC, Kellogg Community College in Battle Creek. After that, I decided, I still wanted to be a little closer to home, given the just total craziness and uncertainty of what you called the pandemic purgatory. I love that term, by the way. But yeah, so I came to Western. I spent my first year in the dorms, and I was really looking for a way to get connected with people socially on campus specifically. And so in some miracle, I took the Vietnam Rock and Soul class at the Honors College, and one of my peers in the class said that she had a show on WIDR. So immediately I was just enthralled by the idea. I wanted to be a part of it, and I didn't really know how. But originally, my first thoughts were just to be a DJ. Then I realized that the station was hiring, and I figured, I love music. Why not go for one of the positions? So I came in originally as the music director, and things were kind of in an overwhelming shape at that point. I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to do in my position. I spent my first week cleaning a lot. The office spaces had, digital or physical media everywhere, CDs, records, you name it. Um, and so that was just kind of originally getting used to the space and kind of spending more time around the people who were involved with the station at that time. Um, but I would just say the main thing that kind of held me back from making a lot of progress in the beginning as the music director was a lack of documentation. because with WIDR, obviously our medium is oral. We're telling things vocally, auditorily, however you want to say that. And so I think that's how a lot of the training happened before COVID. And with myself, and I know the other directors have experienced this too, losing those people who knew how to do their jobs really well and then not having very solidified documentation to move on from there and know how to kind of fill that space made things probably the most difficult.
Yeah, I do want to point out, your generation of directors really, more so than I can recall anyone in recent memory, really had to do a lot of stuff from scratch because, not no demerit of the people who were at the helm when the pandemic went down, but kind of switching from nobody at the station for over half a year to, not in person to in person. Like that is a very strange and unique transition for directors have to kind of go into. So, that's some really important insight on that. I appreciate that. Kind of leading after that. So, now that the kind of the team that y'all have built up over the last couple of years, we've got all of these really novel, cool things. You have new bumpers. You have the audio dramas. You have kind of it feels like there's been more direct student engagement than there's been a long time. So could you kind of walk us through how did it evolve from kind of rebooting the station from COVID to where we are now, where we've really got all of these robust, not only robust programming, but all these like robust activities that y'all have been coordinating throughout the year.
Yeah, so you brought up some great points. I think the first thing going back to you said during COVID, a lot of people did pre-recorded shows. So coming back again, we had to relearn how to train people to become DJs. So that was kind of the first step in maintaining consistency over the air. I also just really have to commend Ryan Misiak and Dan Hubble. They're the production director and production assistant, respectively. They've just completely rebuilt the production program. Um, and, I really can't speak to all of the little minute details that they've put into it, but it's been a lot of work on their end. But I would say, not only did we have the pandemic kind of against the station, but we're also in an era where media consumption has changed irrevocably, just incredibly. And, a lot of people in our generation, they are more used to listening to streaming platforms to find their music rather than tuning into the radio. And so we kind of had to adapt in that way of realizing, it's not just music that people are tuning in to listen to. They want to hear their peers, they want to hear news, they want to hear little creative snippets of, interviews or, like you said, the audio dramas. So just kind of covering across all those platforms, not only for more students to find things that they relate to when they listen, but also to get involved with. Because, it's not just journalism majors or film majors anymore that, want to be a part of WIDR. And, there's been majors all across the board over the years, but now, like English majors can submit plays that they've written for audio dramas and things along those lines, if that makes sense.
Okay, great. So I don't know how much more of your time I want to take up. I know you got to get back to studying, but I'm kind of want to leave off with kind of this third question. Especially like being stewards of my show is all about independent media. Everything from nonprofit outlets to people in their community who really just they have a platform and they research their stuff and they let people know what's going on. And uh, you know, we've also had, we've had the Western Herald updates going on recently too. We just got those started up. So I was just kind of curious, like your perspective as a outgoing student and the importance of these student college radio stations as a source of like independent, kind of grassroots media that can really engage with its community and can kind of be an alternative to a lot of like the really commercial stuff we see on TV or streaming.
Yeah, I really think the root lies in community. A big pillar of WIDR's music at this point in time is local music because we have such a rich and vibrant local music scene here in Kalamazoo. So I think just being able to share things that are happening and being created here in our town just contributes so much more to this sense of community because we do have our national news. It's just as important, but I think it can also lead to feelings of isolation if you don't necessarily see the things you're hearing about around you in your everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to close by giving a huge thank you. So as I mentioned, I'm kind of a legacy DJ. I do want to just offhandedly mention, while I would like to play music at the station till I drop dead. Anybody who wants to come and do like a news talk show or engage with local politics, start your own show or come co-host with me, or I will take on apprentices, happily. Um, but I just want to say that, in 2020, there are a lot of us, this is a community institution. You could talk to like all the elder artists in Kalamazoo, and they were probably going to Barking Tuna. They were probably, they have memories of going to wider fundraiser shows. They remember like hearing their first alternative record tuning into the station, and there was a palpable fear that the pandemic was gonna like just gobble it up. And I really think your outgoing class, more than anybody else, has really saved us from that outcome. And just, again, being agile, stronger than ever. The WIDR app was one of the biggest um, uh, what was it, advancements, developments. I'm trying to reach for the word. I've seen in a long time that really makes us more accessible to a lot of listeners. And something we didn't even mention, y'all also had to navigate just moving to an entire studio. And sorry, not to keep you too long, but could
No,
you
not
maybe
at all. I
comment on
can
that?
I can stay a little longer
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. For
If you
sure.
could maybe comment on like the whole process of moving from fonts over to this student center.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest differences between the old studio and the new studio is, obviously we are so much more accessible here. We are right in the middle of campus. People walk by every single day, whereas before we had to record videos to show people how to find us. So there's just this new challenge, exciting challenge, to, engage as many people that walk by as possible. It's definitely been a process making the transition overall. I know a lot of hosts, especially DJs, have commented on, fonts just felt more like home. There was so much more history within those walls. There were stickers everywhere. And I guess for the director team, I think all of us realize that right now we're planting a seed, and it may not be fruit that we get to experience now in our time here, but kind of our main mission within our roles was to make sure that we build this foundation for the generation of wider leaders to come.
Oh, that is a fantastic answer. That it really touches the cockles of my heart. But both as like a radical newsman and somebody who's been kind of involved in the scene for a long time. So I guess with that, I want to Logan, thank you so much for everything that you have done for the station, as well as all the rest of the outgoing directors. On a personal level, thanks for standing by me and our radical little show, and also let me spin records, hopefully until I turn into dust. I got a little something, so hold on. And I want to pass on like all the outgoing directors. They get to choose between either a radical record or a radical book because I do the electro pop show after this. But I'll let you pick between these three. Um, got
Oh my God.
Erasure, Eurythmics, Touch, and this one's a little bit more obscure. This is Eleanor Jungle Wave. So just pick one, and I will let the other outgoing directors know. They have their choice between one of my dusty old electro pop records or some sort of Marxist screed. But
Oh my
yeah,
gosh, I'm gonna have to go with the most obscure ones.
yeah.
Eleanor.
All right, there you go. All
Awesome.
right.
Wow, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Andy.
Thank you for your service and good luck to all of your forthcoming ventures into post college and beyond.
Thank you so much. I leave with saying that I couldn't have done it without my team, and I can't wait to see what Wider and Western does in the future.
All
Thank you
right.
so much.
Oh, thank you. All right. Okay, well, folks, we're going to go to another quick little break. When we come back, I guess I'll continue complaining about Civil War, and then we're going to talk about some of the protests that have been popping off, both at U of M and Columbia. We will be right back. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your source for political revolution. Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR. Again, big thanks to Logan Lastname, who just joined us to talk a little bit about the recent history of WIDR. They're zooming off to go do one of their exams. Yeah, what's the terminology with an exam? Is it break a leg? I don't know. It's more of a theater thing, I guess. So we're gonna transition real quick. So I was kind of starting off, teeing off a little discussion about Civil War, the movie, and uh, a couple things I wanted to kind of focus on. So artistically, I think you analyze this movie a little bit differently than you would as from a more material, political perspective. But as somebody who's also done a fair amount of writing, when I was in school here, I was an English major. I did a lot of playwriting and a fair amount of screenwriting too. There were a lot of things about the movie that just hit a sour note with me, even just from a writing perspective. Um, I would say spoilers, but there's not really much about the movie to spoil. If you've seen the trailer, that's pretty much what happens in the movie. And even the things that you would think, you know, you'd want to flesh out your characters, that doesn't really happen. So, let's go ahead and start with this kind of the unreality of certain things in the movie. So, it's from a European director, guy who did Ex Machina and Men. Generally, I've enjoyed their movies before, but this particular subject matter, it feels a little off key to make it such a tremendous abstraction. And what I mean by that is like if you go into this movie as an anarchist, a Marxist, or just anybody who's really been paying attention to American politics for the last couple of years, you may be similarly irritated and befuddled by what you witness in the movie. And that is to say, there's a lot of shocking imagery, not necessarily violent, but a lot of what we've been queued up to see in post-apocalyptic fiction. That whole cinema language of society has collapsed, which in itself is not all that creative. It's been done. I feel like the director is going for this thing that like, oh, it's so shocking to see these things happen, off the side of American highways or monuments and on one hand, cinematically, we've disaster porn has been a thing for a while, but also, when the things we see in the present are more genuinely more shocking than what we're being presented with in this film, it doesn't really elicit, I think, the emotional reaction the director is going for, which again, the whole thesis of the movie, and again, it doesn't even really push this point strongly enough to even wonder if the points of the movie. One of the biggest problems with the film is that it's very aimless. Um, and certain things about the characters that are alluded to are never really focused on or further investigated, discussed. Because like if you want to do a character drama focusing on photojournalists rather than like this broad political landscape that you're imagining, that's fine, but you need to develop and flesh out the characters and what their motivations are. There's and this line is in the trailer. Um, Kirsten Dunst's character talks about being a war photojournalist and saying I wished I hoped my coverage would come back to the United States like as a warning because she'd been covering wars her entire career and that's interesting. This idea of an American war photojournalist, seeing the carnage that they photographed abroad brought home. That is interesting. But nothing is really done with it on either a character or a political level. And when you're watching a movie and you're writing a better version of it in your head as you watch it, that's usually a bad sign. So again, I want to focus more on like the politics. I could start nitpicking this movie forever. So let's just focus on the politics, or really lack thereof. That is the fundamental weakness of this movie, is that it relies on this abstraction of American Civil War without diving into any of the specifics. And I understand what they're going for. This kind of like it's neutral to the point of absurdity. And when I do say absurdity, again, the central conflict that the movie poses is the Western forces versus the federal government. Apparently, Florida has its own alliance that is like literally one line. The Western forces, which is Texas and California. Okay, now look, I don't see that as quite as absurd as a lot of my comrades and colleagues do. We all know currently the politics of Texas and California couldn't be any more different. But strange things have happened. I could see, and conflict makes strange bedfellows. But the idea that you wouldn't try to explain that in any way. And again, this can just be dialogue with the people you're driving past. It doesn't have to be an exposition dump. There's an old writing screed, show not tell. And the thing is, I think they took that too seriously, because the way you show things is supposed to explain parts of your movie. You can show why did Texas and California become, and again, while you're watching the movie, you're literally trying to problem solve how did this political outcome come about. Maybe there was like a political takeover of the Hispanic population. Again, it takes you out of the movie because you're trying to problem solve things that the movie does not bother explaining. And there's a difference between kind of this artistic thing. It's like, oh, we're just going to leave it like, kind of fill in the blanks. And like, yeah, there are times in movies where it's advantageous for you to fill in the blanks or kind of theorize. It makes it more interesting. In this case, it just makes it frustrating because you're pulled out of the movie asking, how in the hell did California and Texas get together to take on the federal government? Um, Also, just like the way the film is caked in this neutrality. As I mentioned at the top, both liberals from blue states and men from red states apparently propelled Civil War to the top of the box office. So it goes to say that this movie is apparently different people are reading different things into the film. And, whereas I guess like some European artiste might see this as like a good thing, for some, an American socialist in 2024, it really comes off more as not only lazy but a little lacking in courage. Because we need to call out what is actually going on without trying to make some very abstract statement about what war is bad. Yeah, I think we all figured that out. Um, and it wouldn't frustrate me as much, except that they allude to real life things while, constituting this fantastical scenario. There's this scene that really sticks in my head where these photojournalists are documenting a battle between um, we don't even know who, and federal government soldiers. Maybe it's the Florida faction. I don't know. They're all wearing Hawaiian shirts. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you have been versed in kind of these like fringe politics in the last few years, you might read that as an allusion or a reference to the Boogaloo Boys, who were a kind of fringe, kind of libertarian faction who wanted to instigate a civil war in the United States. So you've got these gentlemen wearing Hawaiian shirts in a gun battle. But again, you have absolutely no discussion about what their politics are, why they are fighting the federal government. We do get some explanation early in the film. Nick Offerman, although he's only in the movie for like 5 seconds, he does a very good job playing a president who and this is the interesting part. I've seen a lot of liberal reviewers, kind of refer to his character as a cipher for Donald Trump. I've seen some of the right-wing people like this movie think of him more as Joe Biden. Um, and it may be one of the few really interesting things that the movie does, but I don't even know if it does it on purpose, which is to say, Nick Offerman, his portrayal of the president is like if you looped together Donald Trump and Joe Biden into one president, like the same kind of like hokey professional down home veneer with Donald Trump's more authoritarian tendencies, and you basically have the president in Civil War. Now, was it the writer and director's intention to portray the president as kind of like the Washington, D.C. blob? Well, maybe. I don't feel like I want to give them enough credit because it seems through the rest of the film they're not really willing to make a hard decision about anything. Um, but yeah, that is something I was thinking about as watching this. If you're like kind of a more, blue state liberal, you might come as like, oh, this man is Donald Trump. And if you're one of those red state men who apparently propelled the movie to popularity, it's like that's Joe Biden. Um, and uh, look, that kind of storytelling doesn't get to the root of why we have the kind of chaos going on that we do right now. And I think it would have been much better in the hands of an American filmmaker, or even like a European filmmaker who has spent time in America, knows about its politics, studies it. Because like it was almost like this anti-statement. He wanted to make a movie that was kind of abstracted and outside of current American politics. But if you're making something about an American Civil War in 2024, you necessarily need to put your goalposts there. You need it to be familiar enough for the audience so they can understand what's happening, and they're not just being taken on a ride with a couple of characters that, frankly, you don't really learn to kind of empathize or engage with. Um, you do have this story about a lot of critics have cited this the importance of journalism, and of course on the show we talk about the importance of journalism all the time. But here's something that really just bothered me about the way Civil War portrays journalism. Right at the outset, the main goal, the main MacGuffin of the movie is we have to get an interview with the president before the Western forces take him down. That's their whole goal. These journalists who are going on this road trip across war ravaged Eastern Corridor. Um, Now, the better writing movie I was writing in my head is like again, if you are a filmmaker who's more in tune to class and like history, I really wish the director of Andor maybe had made this movie. He might have made something a little bit better. But if you're more in tune with the history of like class warfare and revolution, you know that like the more interesting stories are, it should the story should have been the stories they encountered along the way. That is an interesting story. And in fact, the few moments of inspiration that the movie has is kind of looking at what society does when America falls apart. There's this scene where they're in this big football stadium, and it's basically turned into this giant kind of disaster relief area slash commune. There's graffiti everywhere. Again, this movie focuses way more on the aesthetics than trying to present you with any sort of like interesting narrative. Um, which again, if you're any sort of materialist or like you've been paying attention to current politics, it's gonna make you a little irritated. This movie really feels like it was made for kind of lower info liberals and conservatives who pay enough attention to things to know that we're at a really tenuous place in American democracy, but do not pay enough attention to know what the actual nuts and bolts of that are. So, as I was saying, the way that the film portrays journalism really bothered me because you had this gang of journalists who their whole goal is to interview the president. When really, if an actual civil war broke out, far more interesting would be the stories of regular people and how they are dealing with it, how they're responding to it, how they're rising to the occasion. A better, more interesting film would have probably focused on that. I think it's like I was talking with my fiance after we watched it. It's like, I thought to myself, like, what would say like Amy Goodman from Democracy Now be doing in that situation? She'd be going into like the Bronx. She'd be going into small towns, probably with Kevlar and a helmet, and just being like, so it's like, so how is your community organizing to in response to the Civil War? You know, um, at that point, who cares about this president? He's on his way out. He's authoritarian. I will say, some people were confused about why they were going after the president. They do allude to, um, and again, it's more frustrating because you're trying to make everything abstract, but you're referring to very real things that have happened recently. So the president, there's a scene where the journalists are talking about what questions they're going to ask the president. Among other things, is like, why did you break up the FBI? Why did you drone bomb Americans on American soil? Um, why did you stay on for a third term? And these are all things that are in the public consciousness. Again, whether you think the head tyrant in charge is Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Um, but again, the film's lack of specificity will drive, just like I'm gonna say, if you're a leftist, this film is gonna drive you up the wall. You're just some moments are just kind of funny, but some just make you irritated in the way that it just is coming at these situations, with this like false neutrality and veneer of abstraction. One line that stuck in my head was, there's a discussion between Kirsten Dunst and younger sort of like protege war journalist. That is another kind of small arc in there that wasn't developed enough. Okay, here's another aside. Something they set up and don't do anything with is Kirsten Dunst seems her character seems genuinely disturbed to be doing war journalism in the United States. Her younger colleague seems pretty nonplussed about it, other than just seeing really intense stuff for the first time in their career. So that would be an interesting dynamic. You have the older journalist who can't believe that the conflict has come home, and a younger Gen Z journalist who is not really all that surprised. And you do find that with younger people. Like, most Gen Z and millennials I talk to really wouldn't be too surprised if the US was in a state of collapse or started falling apart. That's something a lot more shocking to older generations. But again, the movie doesn't explore that. It doesn't explore that. It's just you get so frustrated as a writer just watching movies like this. It's just like, I know you think you're being really clever by not like explaining anything, but it's just making us all very frustrated. Another piece to it is the way it emphasizes like the professionalism of journalism, and um, it seemed very out of step with the kind of journalism that is important now. Um, and that is to say, they're looking for the big scoop that they can sell to whatever's left of the New York Times or the Guardian or whatever. And like that kind of journalism, while some of it still operates in some way, shape, or form, independent journalism has really been stepping in to tell these real stories, especially stories that the mainstream media is not hearing. That was completely absent from this movie. It was upholding a version of the press that literally only still exists in the imagination of like a New York City liberal. Um, let's take what's going on in Gaza right now. Foreign journalists aren't even allowed in there. The reason we know that there's a genocide going on is because independent journalists, with their phones, with their cameras, have been risking their lives to get these images and this information out. Sometimes we're talking about like teenage Palestinians on their TikToks getting this information out. It's not the professional war journalists who have informed us about what is going on in Gaza. Like, we aren't suddenly aware of a genocide because a war photojournalist took a really amazing picture, which is kind of the emphasis they put on it in the film. So it's again really out of step with, because again, journalism is really important, but it's a version of journalism that is outdated, outmoded, and really speaks to just an absolute lack of politics. You're uplifting these journalists who are basically completely apolitical about the conflict. That's something we were talking about. It's like these people are risking their lives. And I guess they try to say like, oh, they're basically like thrill seekers or something. And no, that's not good enough. It's like you have to want to share these images, at least to have like a desire to change things or to show people what's going on. And the way these characters function in this movie, just they think the act of taking the picture is the important part. It's not the story that is told with it. And that is particularly frustrating because everything about an American Civil War conflict would be so steeped in ideology. You're not. It's like you necessarily, will have to pick some side or another. And if you're risking your life, you're going to be doing it for something important. You know. So I've kind of talked about like what would an actual American Civil War look like. Well, I think it would probably be a lot closer to that scene with the football stadium and people reclaiming public space, mutual aid, and we would have fascist elements that occasionally would pop off. Maybe try to invade your town because you think they think that you're poisoning their well with gay frogs. As Is anybody who has like a revolutionary desire or a hope that like the workers can seize things in America, it is very depressing. I guess it's like kind of a glass half full thing because I think given a collapse, I think people could band together and create it would be tough, but I think something better would emerge out of the rubble. But like, yeah, it's why are people at war with each other? Why would they be warring? And uh, the movie didn't really deal with the kind of radicalization that's going on in the United States, where people are led down these big conspiracy dudes. The only scene that really even alludes to actual politics, there's a scene where Jesse Plemons kind of plays this very like reactionary American soldier, and it's pretty brutal. He like interrogates them on what states they're from, and if they're from like the wrong place, he shoots them. Um, but even that is so vague that you don't really get a sense of why people are at conflict with each other. So, yeah, that's my review of Civil War. If you are a Marxist, materialist, anarchist, or whatever, this movie is going to irritate the hell out of you. And I guess if you are a low info liberal or conservative, it's the best movie of the year, according to the news articles. So, all right. With that, we're going to take a quick little break. When we come back, we've got some important coverage to talk about with what's going on at U of M and Columbia and their Gaza solidarity protests. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your only source for political revolution. Hello. Excuse me. Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. So we want to start this next section of the show. We're going to be talking about what's going on over at U of M and Columbia. There's big Gaza solidarity protests popping off. But before that, do a little bit of housekeeping and again, calling out some BS that I've seen coming from national media and the White House. So the White House put out a statement right around Passover, essentially alluding to Colombia, essentially misconstruing the protests there as violent incitement and anti-Semitism. For the White House, they said, while every American has a right to peaceful protest, calls for violence and physical intimidation targeting Jewish students and the Jewish community are blatantly anti-Semitic, unconscionable, and dangerous, and echoing the rhetoric of terrorist organizations, especially in the wake of the worst massacre committed against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, is despicable. Okay, so and then you've got, again, Mayor Eric Adams echoing similar statements, horrified and disgusted with the anti-Semitism being spewed at and around Columbia University campus. So, for those of you who have actually been paying attention to what the Columbia students are doing, they are demanding that the university divest from Israel, which is currently exacting a genocide on the Gaza Strip. And I'm gonna say, if the students were being violent against Jewish students or anti-Semitic, that would be really unconscionable. Here's the problem. They're making it up. They're not. That is literally not happening. In fact, some of the core groups that organized the Columbia protest, as well as the protests at U of M, included groups like Jewish Voices for Peace. Many rabbinical scholars have participated in these protests. It is not anti-Semitic to protest the genocide in Gaza. And the White House and the mayor of New York and many in the media would like you to get confused and think that these students are being anti-Jewish. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Opposition to what Israel and the Israeli Defense Force is doing is not hateful towards Jewish people, many of whom literally organized both of these protests. And the White House and the media are going out of their way to erase the very necessary voices of these Jewish students who are echoing, not in our name, and sentiments like never again means never again for anyone. And again, this erasure of those voices is part of a deliberate strategy to tie any sort of opposition to what the state of Israel is doing to anti-Semitism, which again is really, really duplicitous in this day and age because there is a ton of actual anti-Semitism going on out there. We've seen a huge upsurge in white supremacy over the last couple of years, but trying to do this willful misinformation about why these students are organizing is not only a lie, but I mean, I think it's going to come back to bite Biden in the election. He's trying to get young people to vote for him. If he's going to spend the next several months gaslighting young people and telling them that they're anti-Semitic for not liking genocide, well, yeah, that might bite us all back in the butt come November. So I did want to break down a couple things. They alluded to terroristic language, and let's clear the record on it. So one thing, again, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and I know we said this on the show before, but I mean it needs to be explained repeatedly. Israel is a state; it does not represent Judaism. There are many Jewish folks out there who are, just find what is going on in Gaza deplorable. Many of whom are organizing these protests, and in here in Kalamazoo too. We have our own local chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace here as well. Another thing that gets pointed to, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That often gets misconstrued as some sort of genocidal call, which I'm going to refer back to an important survey. So there's a survey done amongst Palestinians and Israelis, I think it was about a year ago, kind of asking if they prefer a one-state or two-state solution. Both of them, by a wide margin, favored a one-state solution. But here's the key difference. When asked a follow-up question, Palestinians, by a very large majority, favored a one-state solution where Israeli Jews and Palestinians could live together in a secular state, whereas the majority of Israeli settlers that were polled wanted an exclusive Jewish ethno states that excluded Palestinians. So, like, that's something to think about. When, like, the view of most Palestinians, of majority of Palestinians, is to have a multi-ethnic society where everybody can live in general harmony. They're not trying to eradicate anybody. If anything, that's a little bit of projection going on there, because Israel has and the Israeli Defense Forces have basically been trying to evict Palestinians off their land for close to 70 years now. It's projection of the highest order. And when they talk about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Yeah, it means like having voting rights and not living in an apartheid system, being actively oppressed. Doesn't mean we want to like drive all of the Israelis out and Again, the history of this area is very interesting and complicated, but you find time and time again, there were a lot of indigenous Jews in the area of Palestine around the time of the creation of Israel. And a lot of these IDF forces who'd kind of been trained in colonialism by their British and American brothers didn't like that. There's historical examples of the IDF raiding villages where, again, indigenous Jews and Palestinian Muslims lived in harmony. There's also a lot of Palestinian Christians are being caught in the crossfire. So again, why I went on that little rant is to just understand the geopolitics and the religious stuff that is going on right now are separate. They are trying to intertwine them in such a way that the American government is trying to make you think that opposing Israel is tantamount to opposing or oppressing Jewish people, and that is patently untrue. That is false, 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 incorrect, etc. Another thing that I wanted to point out is there's been a lot of hay made about the term intifada. And I wanted to kind of explain that because I think, like, a lot of people hear that, and I think, especially to the Western ear, it sounds a lot scarier than it is. So let me explain what intifada means. It is a very general term in Arabic for rebellion or uprising or resistance. Several campuses have put up banners that say Intifada, and basically it's what a lot of conservatives, reactionaries, and pro-Zionist politicians have been pointing to as the proof in the pudding that these protests are explicitly anti-Semitic. We need to explain a little bit of history here. The term intifada in Arabic is very general. It refers to any uprising or resistance movement. Imagine, say like we here on campus threw out a banner that said uprising. And that could refer to anything too. Like that's a very general statement. And then, and then let's say like the administration here claimed that like the banner that said uprising was somehow anti-Semitic or it was like anti-Muslim or pick your whatever bigotry that you want to oppose on there. So one where it does get a little confused, it can refer to a violent or non-violent uprising. And again, a lot of this goes back to more projection. Is this idea that a lot of reactionaries claim intifada refers to eliminating the Jews from Israel or just as a people, and that is absolutely not what it refers to. And it doesn't. It also does not refer exclusively to the Israel-Palestine conflict. This has been used many, many times across decades and even centuries. Actually, like in recent history, the first example of intifada that being used as a kind of organizing language was in 1952. And that was when the Kingdom of Iraq, when socialist and communist parties took to the streets to protest the Hashemite monarchy, which was inspired partially by the 1952 Egyptian revolution. So again, it's a little bit of historical irony because if like socialist/communist organizations, they are typically, secular in nature. They are not explicitly like this sort of like Islamist fundamentalism that always gets kind of overlaid or posed as the meaning of intifada in Western media. So there's your second correction: is they are trying to claim intifada is innately anti-Semitic and genocidal term. It is not. It literally just refers to an uprising, which is exactly what's been going on over at U of M and over at Columbia. So I'm going to read a couple articles back to back. First, let's talk about what's going on over at U of M, and then we'll talk about what's going on at Columbia. Columbia was really the fires, but this is a big deal, everybody. This is like some of the biggest campus protests since the 1960s. It's really amazing to think about. But let's talk a little bit about what's going on just to the east of us in Ann Arbor. We've got some comrades in Ann Arbor who are putting their money where their mouth is, and they're standing up for divestment. So this is from the Michigan Daily, written by Sneha Dahan Dapani and Matthew Shanborn. It's published yesterday. We will not stop until we get full divestment. University of Michigan student protesters camp out on Diag for divestment. About 40 pro-Palestine University of Michigan student protesters set up an encampment on the Diag Monday morning, with the earliest arriving at about 6 a.m. From a distance, passerbys can see a collection of tents, Palestinian flags, and signs asking the university to divest from companies with financial ties to Israel. The demonstration follows 6 months of protesting for the university's divestment, beginning with a sit-in outside the university president's house on October 13th. Since then, pro-Palestinian student protesters have chanted for the university to divest from companies profiting from the Israeli military campaign in Gaza at Pierpoint Commons, throughout the Michigan Union, and inside the Alexander G. Ruthin building. Monday's protest was organized by the Tahrir Coalition, a multicultural coalition of more than 80 pro-Palestine student organizations, including Students Allied for Freedom and Equality and the U of M chapter for Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm going to underscore that again. Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish organizers helped organize this. He's going to just cut it with the anti-Semitism false accusations there. Anyway, recent protests on the U of M campus have followed a similar pattern of pro-Palestine protests at universities across the nation. At Columbia University, more than 100 students were arrested for participating in an encampment on April 18th. Similarly, at Yale University, more than 45 student protesters were arrested for trespassing on Monday morning. At the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the campus chapter of Students for Justice for Palestine held a protest on April 19th in support of the student arrest at Columbia. Both Yale and Columbia hold investments in Israeli companies. In an interview with the Michigan Daily, Rackham student Shreya Shaderi said the encampment on the Diag was inspired by the events at other universities across the country. This encampment is a statement to the university that we will not move until they divest, and we will not allow our endowment to fund the genocide. And it's also an act of solidarity with other student organizers across the country, from Columbia to UNC Chapel Hill to a bunch of other places that are setting up similar solidarity on campus. So it's not just for this one event. It is a national movement that we are participating in to demonstrate that students across the United States are not going to stand for our universities funding genocide and profiteering from genocide. In an interview with the Daily, LSA sophomore Annabelle Bean, co-founder of the University of Michigan chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace, said the protest is intended to be a call to action for the university to divest. You'll see that our universities are funding this genocide both directly and indirectly, funding the larger military-industrial complex, and materialism more largely. We really want to tell them that this is our university. In a press release obtained by the Daily, the Tahrir Coalition stated that actions taken by the university in response to student activism, such as trespass warnings, arrests, and proposed changes to the university's free speech policy, have caused feelings of targeted repression against pro-Palestine students or protests. Chaderi said she hopes university administration comes to speak with the student protesters on the Diag. We expect the university to come talk to us and negotiate with us, Chaderi said. They're probably going to try to kick us off. We want to emphasize that people camp on the Diag all the time. So any acts to try to kick us off show there's no other interpretation than it being repression of our right to protest. And we've seen that the administration has consistently demonstrated that they are willing to take any and all measures to repress pro-Palestine protests, specifically compared to other protests. Going on, excuse me. Yeah. We want full divestment, being said. We will not stop until we get full divestment, and if the university wants to take the steps to be quote unquote the leaders and best, like they like to call themselves, we will be here and we're ready to talk with them about divestment. We've actually been trying to talk with them for about 6 months at this point. We will not stop and we will not rest until there is full divestment. So just a little sum up to, did Michigan Daily also talk to the ADL? which again, really absolutely misconstrued and uh, basically lied on the students about what at U of M and what they were doing. Basically called it anti-Semitic, and said that Intifada refers to indiscriminate violence directed at Jews in Israel, which again is, as I described earlier, incorrect. And as I also described, there were key organizations and organizers from Jewish Voice for Peace who organized this protest. Just want to, again, put a fine point on that. And the university itself, University of Michigan, put out a very kind of bland statement about we support free speech, but we're not going to allow anything that disrupts our laws and rules at the university. Safety first. Okay. So if you want to read that for yourselves, that is from the Michigan Daily, and we will be keeping you posted on what's going on over at U of M. We'll see if they can keep it up. I know, again, this is kind of towards the end of the semester for a lot of students, but I stand in support here at the show of what the students at the University of Michigan are doing, standing up for divestment from Israel and from their, U of M in any way materially supporting the ongoing genocide in Gaza. So from there, from Ann Arbor, let's go back to New York and let's focus a little bit on Columbia University, which really has been, has kind of started the fire with these universities that we've seen across the country, these mass student protests. Again, the biggest we've seen since the Vietnam and civil rights protests of the 60s, standing up against the apartheid and genocide. This is an article from Left Voice I wanted to share with you. I thought it was kind of summed it up best, and like especially some of the political dimensions of it. All eyes on Colombia. We must build a national campaign to defend the right to protest for Palestine. It was published on April 19th, written by Mariam Alanis. Or Elena's, sorry. Columbia University has made national and international headlines for both the combative student movement, which arose in opposition to Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza, and for the administration's brazen attacks against student activists. On April 18th, the university sanctioned the repression of hundreds of students and called the NYPD to arrest over 100 students who helped organize the student-led occupation dubbed the Gaza Solidarity Encampment. This repression has become the latest flashpoint in the university's offensive against the movement. It also marked the first authorization of police repression within the campus in decades. Columbia students organized the occupation of East Butler Lawn to call for divestment and denounced the suspension and eviction of 6 Columbia students earlier this month. They began their occupation on the morning of the congressional hearing that Columbia President Namat Manoush Shafiq participated in. And just an aside, the article talks about this, but Columbia's president just totally threw their students under the bus. You had a bunch of reactionary Congress people grilling Columbia's president about oh, your students that are protesting Israel, they're anti-Semitic, aren't they? Aren't they spreading hate? And she's like, well, maybe they are. I think they are. Some people don't think they are. But it's it drives you mad because these terms, these words have meaning. These terms have definitions, and if you're going to just buckle under pressure from people who are going out of their way to miseducate people about what these terms mean, then you are just giving ground to the fascists essentially. So again, really just completely throwing their student body under the bus, who has every right to protest against genocide. In December, the House of Representatives Committee on Education and the Workforce held a hearing to grill the university presidents of Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT, and pressure them to crack down on pro-Palestine protesters at their universities. After being slammed in Congress for not going all out to discipline the movement, the presidents of Harvard and University of Penn were pressured into resigning. Shafiq, hoping to avoid the same fate, went further than the presidents of the other elite universities and committed to disciplining Columbia faculty members Joseph and Donnie Masad and Catherine Franke, and firing Professor Mohammed Abdu. Both Republicans and Democrats in Congress praised the remarks of Columbia administrators, who promised to curtail academic freedom in the name of confronting quote-unquote anti-Semitism. The bipartisan congressional witch hunt is now extending to K-12 school districts, whose administrators from cities like New York will face a similar congressional hearing on May 8th. The congressional hearings are important for the Biden administration, which is trying to contain the unprecedented movement in solidarity with Palestine, especially before the elections. The bipartisan regime is pressuring academic bureaucracies across the country to crush the incipient student movement, which plays an important role in pro Palestine protests on their behalf. At the same time, the Democratic Party is trying to divert the movement through co optation by putting forward rhetorical concessions around the ceasefire demand, trying to channel the movement off the streets and into the ballot boxes through the uncommitted campaign of the left wing of the Democratic Party, and by offering concessions like Biden's newly proposed student debt relief package. The McCarthyist offensive sweeping universities, workplaces, and the streets is key for the bipartisan regime because it puts them in a better position to attack movements that question their interests in the future. At the same time that universities are being attacked, the right to protest is being attacked in 3 states. This week, the Supreme Court announced that it will not hear McKesson versus Doe, which leaves in place a lower court decision to effectively eliminate the right to organize a mass protest in the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. We'll have more on that next week's show, too. That's some Titanic news we haven't really touched on yet. McCarthyism, political persecution, and state repression infringing on the basic democratic rights have a long history in the U.S. Despite the country being hailed by even sectors of the left as a citadel of democracy, the Kent State left massacre, which left 4 university students dead at the hands of the National Guard, escalated the movement against the war in Vietnam, and after Black Lives Matter, a slew of laws were passed across the country which restricted the right to mobilization and free speech. In universities, administrators are recalling old school and Orwellian intimidation tactics like interrogations and surveillance of technology, including email accounts. As one of the recently suspended Columbia students recounted to Left Voice, university groups are also receiving threatening emails from campus authorities to dissuade student activism. Already, the recent events at Columbia are sparking the outrage of broad sectors, including some faculty at the university who have differing views on Palestine. Public figures like Cornel West and Ilhan Omar have spoken out in solidarity with those facing attacks. Ilhan Omar's own daughter, a student at Barnard College, a college of Columbia, was suspended after her mother's remarks, showing the targeted nature of the attacks. Shafiq, who sent an email to the university before ordering the police repression of the occupation, tried to convey a regretful tone and paint the students mobilizing as quote unquote bad apples within the Columbia community. But the administration knows exactly what it's doing and who it's going after. Anyone that speaks out in solidarity with Palestine. Columbia University has been an important site of struggle for the Palestine solidarity movement. On one hand, it is an elite institution older than the country itself, which plays a key role in the functioning of the capitalist regime. It is the alma mater of several former presidents. It is a place where you can brush elbows with war criminals like Hillary Clinton, and its donors enjoy close financial ties with the State of Israel. On the other hand, Columbia has a politicized student body with an important tradition of struggle, and it is the academic home of a number of prominent pro-Palestinian thinkers. In keeping with the university's ties to the bipartisan imperialist regime, Columbia's president, who is the first Arab to lead an Ivy League institution and the first woman to lead Columbia, is also a former director of both the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Again, it's that rainbow capitalism at work, folks. Both these institutions play a central role in maintaining the imperialist oppression of dependent countries by promoting austerity policies that benefit the profits and interests of big multinational corporations tied to imperialism. These characteristics make Columbia an important place in the solidarity struggle with Palestine. They expose the relationship between the imperialist regime and the academic bureaucracies, as well as the contradictions between the administrations who protect the interests of the bipartisan regime and their student bodies, which are playing a disruptive role due to their growing sensibility against the interests of U.S. imperialism, as evidenced by the pro-Palestine movement. These tensions have already come to a head at the height of the movement when Columbia decided to take a heavy-handed approach and ban outright Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine. Just again, Columbia decided to ban Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine from its campus, creating a manual for other universities to do the same. In recent months, the movement has experienced a downturn on the streets, Yet there are still a number of radical actions that express the depth of hatred toward the genocide aided and abetted by U.S. imperialism. But the occupation at Columbia and the subsequent repression has put the university at the center of a storm. The occupation revives both the radical tradition of Columbia's 1968 occupation and also the trauma of the brutal crackdown in which the police, with the university's blessing, violently removed the occupation, ending it with one of the largest mass arrests in New York City's history. The regime and its proxies are trying to repress the most radical sectors of the current movement in order to reduce their influence on the masses and workers, demoralize the sector still mobilizing, and divide the good protesters, ones who write their congressperson and vote uncommitted, from the bad protesters, the ones who disrupt the streets and occupy campuses and workplaces like Google workers did this past week. We need a perspective that unifies all the sectors under attack, with all conscious sectors disgusted by the infringement of basic democratic rights. This comes in a this comes in a moment when companies like Google are firing workers outright for their views, and groups like Within Our Lifetime are being banned from Instagram for bravely mobilizing against the genocide. It's time to organize against this witch hunt in a coordinated way. While it remains to be seen how the situation will develop at Columbia and whether more students and academic workers will be reprimanded, this week shows the level of repression that the academic bureaucracies, bosses, and the bipartisan regime are looking to unleash on the movement. As the Biden administration tries to build an electoral campaign around defending democracy here and around the world, it begs the question, democracy for whom? Clearly, this is not a democracy for pro Palestine activists, workers, and students. It's clear that a country that can't even afford basic human rights to its own citizens, that funds and supports brutally oppressive regimes like Netanyahu's in Israel, a country that inspires other countries like France and Germany to also ban the right to protest, is anything but a true democracy. As the popular saying goes, NYPD, KKK, IDF are all the same. The same police that repress us here are trained by the police that repress Palestinians. Without a doubt, our struggles are innately connected. The current struggle in defense of our right to speak out, to protest, to not fear facing censorship, criminalization, or persecution where we work, study, and live is an urgent priority. We can't let them call us terrorists while they are the ones sending bombs to kill innocent Palestinians. We can't leave ourselves without a voice in the midst of a genocide. We can't let these attacks against activists fly or become a part of our common sense. Columbia University is becoming the epicenter of an incipient movement against repression. We need to take this momentum and build a bold, broad, and coordinated national campaign that brings together public figures, unions, activists, the academic community, and beyond to fight with one fist against the offensive that's trying to squash our movement. The statement from the student workers of Columbia recently published can be a basis for the type of democratic campaign that is needed to protect the right to speak out for Palestine. So that was from Miriam Alenas. All eyes on Columbia. We must build a national campaign to defend the right to protest for Palestine. We're going to take a quick little break. When we come back, we're going to transition. I've got some Earth Day coverage that we wanted to hit on while we still got time on today's show. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your only source for political revolution. So next thing that we want to talk about today on the program, we're going to be spending the rest of our time on Earth Day subjects. You know, again, Earth Day was just I think was it yesterday, and there's a lot of environmental issues here in the state of Michigan and across the country that we really want to hit on. And I'm going to be starting with a couple of Michigan-based stories. One is a little bit older, but it really hits on the winter that wasn't. And we've talked a lot about how climate change is going to just devastate us in the years to come. But there's this great article from Bridge, Michigan that really talked about the personal dimension, kind of the heartbreaking loss of winter, which is really what we saw last year. And then so before we get into that, though, Um, I just want to comment a little bit about climate change in Kalamazoo specifically. So, as we spent a lot of time on our show talking about environmental racism, and in particular, the way that Graphic Packaging International is inordinately polluting the North Side neighborhood, which is a predominantly Black and working class neighborhood. According to studies, a lot of residents of the North Side neighborhood have 12 years less of their life expectancy compared to more upwardly mobile and whiter parts of Kalamazoo. And that is an ongoing struggle for those of us here in the Kalamazoo area. And it's going to be continuing deep into the future, especially looking at how, again, corporations are still turning many places into sacrifice zones, even as the urgency of the climate crisis is being put increasingly in all of our faces. I'm also reminded of the story that we talked about last week about like the pods for houseless individuals. And something I talk about on the show a lot, is the intersection of houselessness and the climate crisis, which is going to become a huge, huge long-term problem for those of us in Kalamazoo. Um, it's predicted by the end of the century, Southwest Michigan's climate is going to resemble something closer to that of Georgia. It's a lot more hot, a lot more humid, but not nearly as bad. They're not going to hit nearly as bad as some other places in the world. We've also got access to the Great Lakes and some of the largest freshwater reserves in the world. When climate breakdown continues to accelerate, climate refugees are going to multiply exponentially. And I very much do believe that Kalamazoo is going to be one of the big hotspots a lot of climate refugees are going to be looking towards for shelter and safety and harbor during a storm. And as I mentioned constantly, not only do we need to be addressing houselessness as it currently exists in Kalamazoo, but we need to be looking to the future because this problem is just going to grow exponentially as the crisis of climate hits other parts of the world, makes them unsustainable to live in. We're going to have to come up with more creative solutions because there's going to be a lot of people not just wanting, but needing to live in the Kalamazoo area in the decades to come. Are we going to be a welcoming city, or are we going to be a city where we allow the rich to gentrify Kalamazoo and basically turn it into like a giant walled off climate fortress? I know that sounds a little alarmist, but you look at the way these trends are accelerating right now. There's rapid gentrification of the north side going on, while there's still about 9 empty houses for every houseless individual. Are we going to let the people of Kalamazoo reclaim those houses, reclaim that land, or are we going to let them get so gobbled up by property developers who want to jack up the prices and turn Kalamazoo into a walled off resort for the rich? Those are the very real climate implications here in Kalamazoo. Not to mention that constant development is taking away our green spaces, which, in addition to just like, hey, we like having green spaces, are one of the things that offsets flooding, having open land that can soak up excess rainwater. The less of that land that we have, the worse flooding will get in Kalamazoo. And anybody who's lived in Kalamazoo over the last few years knows we've had these freak intense rain events happening with increased frequency. And those are going to only increase in frequency as time goes on. So we need to maintain our green spaces not only just for the preservation of nature and to have nice places to walk around in, but so that Kalamazoo, which is very much going to become a life raft and arc for many people all over the world, does not sink into the water itself. So those are just some of my offhand thoughts talking about Kalamazoo and Earth Day. Wanted to transition then to a Michigan-based story. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I did want to read a few excerpts from it. Um, DTE is they're planning a natural gas project, a pipeline in Michigan. And this article highlights some of the concerns from Michigan-based climate activists. It was written by Izzy Ross, published on April 22nd. DTE Energy is planning to lay down about 20 miles of pipeline to get natural gas to residents and businesses around the villages of Messick and Buckley in northern Michigan's Wexford County. Cyphers, who previously worked as an analyst for DTE, said most people in the area heat their homes with propane or wood stoves, and giving them another choice of fuel makes sense. Going down, talking about the use of natural gas for electricity has grown even as the state's climate plan aims to cut fossil fuels and reach carbon neutrality in the coming decades. That trend follows the fuel's growth in the United States electricity sector, spurred by lower prices, according to the International Energy Agency. As the state tries to transition away from fossil fuels, projects like this are viewed as a step in the right direction by some and a bad investment by others. Natural gas is made up mostly of methane, and methane is extremely potent, much more efficient at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. We call it methane gas or fossil gas because it is a fossil fuel, said James Gignac, who manages policy for the Midwest for the Union of Concerned Scientists, which promotes science-based policy solutions and has long been a voice for fighting climate change. Experts say what we call fuel matters. A 2020 study from Yale found that Americans tended to view natural gas much more favorably than oil or coal and associated it with things like environment and clean, while methane had more associations with terms like greenhouse and climate change. So again, the way corporations describe fuels is important. It's kind of like greenwashing, saying like, oh, natural gas is better for the environment. But if it's methane gas and gets released, it supercharges the greenhouse effect, which is very not good. Gignac said, while burning natural gas may produce slightly fewer emissions than propane and is better than wood, it's important to consider the total footprint. There's also leakage from the gas production and transportation system from where it's extracted and then moved through pipelines, he said. So methane gas is a significant contributor to climate change pollution. While companies across the country have long lauded natural gas as a cleaner energy source, leaks occur throughout the production and delivery, according to the EPA. The environmental think tank RMI reported last July that a leakage rate of just 0.2% could put the climate impacts of gas at the same level as coal. After a major methane leak at a Pennsylvania storage reservoir in 2022, federal government has began rolling out new rules for gas storage facilities, along with plans to fine companies for leaking methane. Michigan's Healthy Climate Plan calls for reducing reliance on natural gas, but by no means has the state shunned the funnel, which can be more affordable than other fuels typically used in rural areas. Going on, proponents have long called it a bridge fuel between other fossil fuel sources and renewable energy like solar, but critics disagree. What they're calling a bridge fuel, really, it's a bridge to nowhere because we are in the midst of a climate crisis, said Ashley Rudzinski, the Climate Environmental Program Director with Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities, a nonprofit in northern Michigan. Rudzinski is disappointed that DTA is continuing to invest in natural gas. It's really important to invest locally and invest in systems that are going to improve our energy security and the reliability of our grid, she said. And for us, that means renewable energy. Back in Messick, at the site of northern Michigan's newest natural gas project, politicians, real estate agents, a school superintendent, and contractors all gathered under a tent at the groundbreaking ceremony. Huge coils of pipelines and excavators sat waiting in the background. Natural gas is one of the ways that we're reducing our carbon footprint, said Scotty Cahoe, DTA's gas operations director for Greater Michigan. While natural gas may not be a renewable energy source, it is a very clean energy source. Michigan has the most natural gas storage capacity of any state, almost an eighth of the country's total storage. So again, you want to read that whole article that comes to us from Bridge, Michigan. It's written by Izzy Ross, published on April 22nd. DTE natural gas project in northern Michigan begins amid climate concerns. So this next article I want to read is kind of more about the cultural impact of climate change, which I think is really just starting to be felt. As you may remember, we had one of the mildest winters I have ever experienced here in Michigan last winter. And I think it was the first winter real people were really starting to feel it and recognize that this is going to change Michigan for the rest of our lives. And this is a great article. I kind of meant to share it when it was first published, and I even considered setting up an interview. But I think for Earth Day, this is maybe the article I want to share with y'all the most because it really dives into what climate change is really going to mean for us as Michiganders. This is an article by Kelly House. It was published on February 26th. Climate change is erasing Michigan winters, taking our heritage with them. Most snowmobile trails aren't groomed until there's at least 8 inches of snow on the ground. It's 6 inches for a cross-country ski trail. Walking on a frozen lake requires 4 inches of clear ice, and it's hard to control a dog sled when daily thaws turn the trail to a sheet of ice. For generations, Michiganders didn't need to pay much attention to those limits. Our winters are known for being consistently, sometimes maddeningly, long, cold, and snowy. Or at least they were. Everybody always says, "Oh, there's next year," said Jacob Piper, 23, of East China. But after the latest in a string of miserable ice fishing seasons, he has drawn a different conclusion. Climate change is here, it's happening, and it sucks. As Michigan closes out the warmest winter on record for much of the state, experts say the past few months are a prelude to the future. Winter, as generations of Michiganders have known it, is disappearing, and it's taking with it a shared heritage that helps define what it means to be a Michigander. One marked by proudly embracing the cold, wearing fur coats in Detroit, playing pond hockey in Rochester Hills, and mushing in Marquette. The sense of loss will accelerate with each lost winter, predicted Nancy Langston, an environmental historian at Michigan Technological University. We don't realize how much it defines us until it suddenly vanishes, she said. Earlier this month, as Piper searched for good ice, Darlene Walsh found herself announcing for the second straight year that Michigan's longest sled dog race, the UP 200, was canceled due to warm weather. Even in the famously wintry Upper Peninsula, daytime highs had been at or above freezing for 9 straight days and would stay that way for 8 more. I'm not a meteorologist. I'm just looking out the window and looking at the thermometer and going, wow, this does not feel like February, said Walsh, president of the Upper Peninsula Sled Dog Association, which hosts the UP 200. The next day, the sun beat down on bare asphalt while a man in shorts lingered near the starting line of the canceled Michigan Snowmobile Festival in Gaylord. The city in the middle of Michigan's snowbelt historically has averaged 12 feet of snow per winter. This year, it's received half of that. Michigan's winters have warmed for decades now, while scientists warned of more dramatic changes ahead if society continues burning fossil fuels that release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The difference this year? It's crossing the freezing line, said Richard Rood, a professor emeritus of climate and space agencies and engineering at the University of Michigan. And it's all of a sudden very obvious to very many people. Across the Great Lakes, daily maximum temperatures this winter have averaged 5 degrees to 10 degrees above average. Snowfall has been paltry and quick to melt. It is tempting to blame El Nino, a cyclical phenomenon in which weak Pacific trade winds cause warmer and drier weather in parts of the northern US and Canada, and many have. But multiple experts who spoke to Bridge said El Nino's effects are minimal in this part of the country, and this year's cycle isn't particularly severe. It's not what an El Nino winter is typical of, said Sapna Sharma, a climate expert and professor in the biology department at York University in Ontario. We've had El Nino winters in the past. We also know that year after year, we're breaking records for the warmest global air temperatures in recorded history. Winters are heating especially fast and are expected to warm several degrees more by mid-century. As those changes escalate, experts say Michigan's average winter will look a lot like the winter of 2024. By the 2050s, most of Michigan will be muddy and sodden in the winter, with less snow, more rain, and crocuses and daffodils blooming in February, Root said. Snow in Detroit will be more like snow in North Carolina, a very rare event, he said. Michigan's erratic day to day weather, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, can mask those long term trends. Indeed, slight warming may lead to more snow in parts of the state, said James Kessler, a scientist at the Northern Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory in Ann Arbor. That's because when the Great Lakes fail to freeze over, Michigan gets lake effect storms caused by cold winds whipping across the water, picking up moisture and dumping it on land. Increasingly, that moisture is coming down as rain or melting within days. Like ice is getting thinner too. Lake ice is getting thinner too. Sorry. This year, the Great Lakes maxed out at just 16% ice cover, less than a third of normal. By mid century, many inland lakes will fail to consistently freeze over at all, said Sharma, who has extensively studied the topic. This means ice fishing season will become shorter and more dangerous if it arrives. And across much of the state, skating and skiing will be activities confined to resorts and arenas capable of making artificial snow and ice. There will be a loss, Rude said. Disappearing winters threaten Michiganders' collective identity, said Langston, the Michigan Tech historian. We're northern people who have chosen to live in a cold, remote place at the edge of the universe, Langston said. And people who live here are really proud of that. For generations, that pride has inspired public celebrations across the state, from Hikinpeva to Lunta, midwinter celebrations in the Upper Peninsula honoring Finnish snow gods, to polar plunges in Houghton Lake, ski contests in Traverse City, snowmobile races on Lake St. Clair, and snurfing, a precursor to modern snowboarding, in Muskegon. Winter recreation is so fundamental to Michigan's culture, it is codified in state law. The state Department of Natural Resources is required to host one fee-free weekend each year for snowmobiling and ice fishing. They're scheduled for February, when we had an almost assured sense that there was going to be snow on the ground, said Tim Novak, state trails coordinator for the DNR. But for the past 2 years, Michigan has been mostly snow-free during the anointed weekends. The dwindling ability to predict when Michigan will have ice and snow is a threat to all sorts of winter traditions, many of which must be planned months in advance. Like sweating in a backyard sauna, mushing is a revered part of the UP's heritage. Newspaper archives document Yoopers racing dog sled for sports as early as the 1800s. In a region often buried under several feet of snow, they also serve a practical purpose, transporting mail carriers, trappers, and surveyors before the era of salt trucks and snowplows. It's an amazing sport, so we want to continue it, said Walsh of the Sled Dog Association. But warm spells have repeatedly challenged the UP 200. The race formerly traveled north to south between Marquette and Escanaba, but unreliable weather in southern UP forced organizers to move the route north to the Lake Superior snowbelt between Marquette and Grand Marias. Now that the route has fallen victim to warm weather for 2 straight years, prompting organizers to swap the race for the Festival of the Sled Dog in downtown Marquette, the old lemons to lemonade thing, Walsh said. Organizers trucked snow into the streets to form a block-long mushing trail and offered dog sled rides to children. There was a makeshift sledding hill, live music, and free hot cocoa. Plenty of people showed up, but a sense of unease dampened the party for some. I'm not going to lie. It's been a little nice not to be buried and frozen all winter, said Amy Zahn, 35 of Marquette. But I hope this isn't what we're in for the years to come. In the winters ahead, Michiganders will increasingly feel that sense of loss, said Langston, the environmental historian. Who we are is shaped by our relationships not just with other humans, but our relationships with the trees around us, the snow, the caribou, the fish, sturgeon. Those relationships are falling apart. For Michigan Poet Laureate Mandy Comer, the loss is measured in missed opportunities to walk Detroit's snowy streets, prepare hearty meals, dress up in winter fashion, and embrace a season of stillness. There's something about the temperature and the calm and the tranquility after a snowstorm that we haven't had enough of, she said. For Piper, the 23-year-old East China ice fisherman, it's in the distance he had to travel this year to find safe ice. One weekend, he drove up to the UP only to discover that most lakes weren't frozen either. Honestly, it just kind of hurts, Piper said. There's nowhere else I'd want to live other than Michigan, and that's specifically because of the seasons. With decades of fishing ahead of him, Piper has accepted that he'll be spending more of his future casting lines from a kayak rather than monitoring tip ups on a frozen lake. He's not the only one changing his habits. State records show snowmobile trail permits were down 11% last year, a trend that is likely to continue. Motorsports giant Yamaha will stop making snowmobiles next year, saying it's no longer a sustainable business. Craig Carruthers, a lifelong snowmobiler in the UP community of Recco, can understand why. This winter, his sleds have barely left storage. He's due to replace one next year, he said, but do you want to buy a sled if you can't ride it? While Carruthers passes the time watching TV and tinkering in the garage, the rental cabins he built to cater to fellow snowmobilers sit empty. They're usually booked solid all winter, he said. As winters fade, businesses and traditions that survive will be those that can adapt. After years of watching the snowy season getting shorter and shorter, the directors of Corner Nordic, a nonprofit cross-country skiing facility north of Grayling, installed snowmaking equipment several years ago to keep 2 kilometers of the facility's 30-plus kilometer trail system skiable throughout the winter. It didn't come cheap, said Larry Damick, one of the facility's director. Every time I push that button to make snow, it's well over $1,000 in electricity. But at least it allows Forbush to host organized races, something it has done multiple times this year after melting snow forced races to relocate from other facilities. The UP 200 has adapted too. In future years, Walsh said group leaders may plan that festival in advance. That way, if a race is canceled, they won't be left scrambling for a plan B. Tourists to the UP typically spend about $180 million each winter. This year, the region may see 20% of that, said Tom Nemechek, executive director of the Upper Peninsula Travel and Recreation Board. Many motels have laid off their staff and closed for the season. If this winter is a harbinger of the future, it's going to be painful, Nemechek said. The UP's claim to fame has always been abundant snow that arrives early and stays late. You take that out of the equation, what are you famous for? That article, that was from Kelly House, February 22nd from Bridge, Michigan. Climate change is erasing Michigan winters, taking our heritage with them. Got one more Earth Day related article to read before we close out the show. This comes to us from Truth Out, written by Nicholas Powers. It was published yesterday. As climate crisis grows, youth environmental movements are radicalizing. Carrying a rifle, a young indigenous man searches the Amazon forest for illegal loggers, followed by a crew from the 2023 documentary film We Are Guardians. 5,000 miles away, youth from Just Stop Oil throw soup on the painting Sunflowers by Vincent van Gogh at the National Gallery in London in 2022. They yell as reporters film them, "What is more important, art or life?" 300 miles away in 2024, activist Greta Thunberg twists in the arms of the police as she and others are arrested for blocking a road to The Hague to protest the Dutch government's tax giveaways to oil companies. The climate crisis is radicalizing youth. Tech savvy and globally connected, Gen Z and millennial activists are becoming increasingly militant as runaway fossil fuel development destroys their future. They attained early victories. They have put ecocide, the utter razing of nature, at the forefront of politics. They drew global attention with protests. They sued governments and won. The wind flies in the face of an older generation of corrupt politicians paid off by the oil industry. Yet the danger of environmental breakdown threatens to overwhelm their initial victories. Climate refugees pour across borders. A global network of fascism is trying to dismantle democracy and snuff out civil society. Young climate activists are at a turning point. Faced with an unlivable future and caught in a bleak present, they push and push and push. They have no choice. They are fighting for their lives. The kids are not all right. They are very, very scared. A worldwide survey by Bath University showed teens and young adults look at the years ahead and tremble. Researchers collected over 10,000 responses across 10 countries and found young people felt anxious and betrayed by their governments. Helplessness and anger permeated Gen Z and millennials from Nigeria to Portugal, from the Philippines to the United States. The anxiety is highest where the risk is greatest, in the global south. Imagine how it feels to be 16 years old and growing up with the climate crisis hanging over your head. You look around and see cars and airplanes spewing carbon. You see plastic bottles spilled from trash cans and garbage floating in the river. You hear about or directly experience catastrophic weather events with each passing season. A deep hopelessness fills your heart. Everywhere you look and everywhere you see is racing to enjoy the good life now, even though it is your death sentence. No one seems to care enough to stop. Many youth have been traumatized by the destruction of their homes and forced migration. Driving through a wildfire is terrifying. Watching your home flooded and your memories wrecked is emotionally devastating. The World Bank estimates that by 2050, Latin America, Sub Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia will produce 143 million climate migrants, according to the Brookings Institution. Each family that leaves their home carries more than their backpacks and children. They carry the pain of being wrenched from their lives. A traumatized person's nervous system is like a tree ripped from the earth with roots exposed and raw. How do youth replant themselves into a future that crumbles into dust? Fight, fight, fight. Yelling at the tops of their lungs, youth activists blocked the road to Vice President Kamala Harris's Los Angeles home. They held bright signs that read, "Fund climate action, not genocide," referencing Israel's ongoing assault on Gaza. 40 protests with the Sunrise Movement chanted fiercely as cops arrested 6 who sat on the road and refused to move. One said to LA Times reporters, "My generation is spending our teenage years organizing for climate action because people like Kamala Harris have failed us." Transforming anxiety into action, youth across the world have surged into environmental groups from the mainstream to the militant. The umbrella organization Youth Climate Movement, which at first focused on school strikes and marches, has now scaled up to demand deep systemic change. The group needs funding. They're wrestling with tactics. Some youth leaders spoke at global conferences like the United Nations COP28. Others grind teeth, impatient with yet another can-kicking summit, wanting more direct action. Scrappier and more in your face groups like the Sunrise Movement and Extinction Rebellion lead the charge. Sunrise is a 501c3 political action organization that first made headlines in 2018 by staging a sit in at the office of then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It has grown into a powerhouse with $13 million in funding, 400 hubs across the country, and a vision to get a Green New Deal passed. Their activists hound Democrats, which has drawn the ire of centrist Democrats who get huffy, with one saying anonymously, "The extremism is the reason that even a lot of moderate, thoughtful people are annoyed with environmentalists." Yet what drives youth climate activists is desperation at the future going up in flames. Sunrise Executive Director Varshini Prakash sighed in despair at the failure of President Joe Biden's Build Back Better. It's like, we voted, we marched, we striked, you know? There were like 16-year-olds doing phone banks. What more do we need to do to win? Extinction Rebellion is a United Kingdom-based group that gets rowdy in the streets. Using nonviolent direct action, the group staged attention-grabbing protests, occupying Greenpeace offices in 2018, blocking bridges across the River Thames, and even more recently, upstaging a Broadway play, Henrik Ibbotsson's An Enemy of the People. An activist stood in the theater and yelled, "I am against the silencing of scientists," and walked out wearing an Extinction Rebellion shirt. 2 others disrupted the play later. More recently, Greta Thunberg joined Extinction Rebellion for a protest at The Hague. One of the group's co-founders, Roger Hallam, was arrested and given a suspended sentence for planning to stop airplanes at Heathrow Airport using a drone. The organization also recently protested at the Science Museum in London. More actions planned for the summer. Add to this illegal victories that youth climate activists are notching. In 2023, a Montana judge ruled that the state violated the rights of its young citizens by allowing fossil fuel companies to destroy the environment. Another case called Genesis B versus EPA, 18 teens from California sued the Environmental Protection Agency for failing to protect them from climate change. Around the world, legal cases are mounting. Climate activists had put more than 2,180 cases on the docket as of late 2022. The goal is to create a legal infrastructure that, alongside protests, allows civil society actors to stop governments and fossil fuel companies from colluding to eviscerate the environment for profit while people die. The risk, of course, is that legal tactics can fail. In June 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the EPA's ability to curtail carbon emissions and continues to roll back the agency's power. Against the legal and political wall, climate activists are becoming desperate. Youth go on hunger strikes. Youth get arrested in nonviolent protests. Youth make connections between climate change and racial justice movements. Youth call and knock on doors and host teach-ins and spread memes and march and go vegan and stop taking airplanes and get arrested again. All of this, and yet the progress is too slow. 2023 may have been the last year below the key climate threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and other historical calamities are continuing to unfold in the global environment. Hints of another direction bubble up in popular media. A 2023 film, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, based on the book of the same name by Andreas Malm, showed a small crew of youth climate activists blowing up an oil pipeline and publicly taking credit. The internet is littered with hand-wringing articles on the possibility of desperate activists turning to property destruction like the Earth Liberation Front in the 1990s. Critics fear such a turn will alienate middle-class sympathizers and stall the movement. Youth climate activists are between a rock and a hard place. They see their future on fire. They know people are suffering and dying right now from climate change. They watch as millions flee drought and monsoons, begging at the borders of the global north for safety. They fight to save themselves. They fight to save life on Earth, the only planet in the vast universe that we know harbors it. They fight by the rules of a rigged game. How long before they throw the rules out? That was an article by Nicholas Powers from Truth Out. Headline: As climate crisis grows, youth environmental movements are radicalizing. Well, that about wraps up our show for today. I want to thank y'all for tuning in. This has been Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You can also find our program online. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and our Media Cyphers Kalamazoo podcast you can find on most podcasting apps. Stay tuned. Electropop Therapy is next. I want to thank y'all for listening, and until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.